Good evening and welcome to tonight's federal candidates debate hosted by Channel Punjabi. My name is Mandeepa Kaur Patrolarai, host of Channel Punjabi's Color Me Desi, an entertainment and lifestyle show, and I have the honor of being your debate moderator tonight. We welcome our viewers, our esteemed panelists, and all of our candidates. Canadians are heading to the polls yet once again, this time to elect the 44th Canadian Parliament on September 20th, 2021. Now, there's definitely a buzz in the country, but also some hesitations as the federal election is set to take place amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Regardless, candidates are hitting those campaign trails, making big promises as well as challenging their opponents in an effort to secure your votes. Many Canadians have fought long and hard for the right to vote. Your vote is your voice. Elections let us determine who is going to make decisions for us in Parliament. Therefore, understanding campaigns is integral before casting your ballots. Now, it comes as no surprise that elections and campaigns are full of buzzwords and jargon. It is our responsibility as voters to ask questions to cut through the jargon, to ask questions to cut through the buzzwords. It is the responsibility of the candidates to answer those questions. Now, elections are not and should never be about personalities. They should be about those hard-hitting, impactful matters that matter to Canadians. So voters have questions. Voters have concerns. And tonight, we are addressing those very questions. We are getting down to those very concerns. Asking the hard-hitting questions tonight are our esteemed panelists. We welcome tonight Mr. Gurpreet Singh Sahota of Channel Punjabi's Sahota Show. We also welcome Mr. Jaskaran Sahota of Channel Punjabi's Frontline, as well as Baldeep Singh, esteemed journalist. Now, tonight's format is going to take place as such. And before doing so, we want to let our viewers know that we here at Channel Punjabi sent an invite out to all candidates. So we thank those who heeded the call and responded, who made themselves accessible to us, the voters. So we thank you them for their time. Now, the debate format tonight will take place as such. We have 4 ridings that are being represented tonight. Each riding has 2 candidates. Each riding's candidates will go head to head. In the first part of the debate, each of the candidates will be asked a series of 3 questions by our panelists. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to respond. Once at the completion of that time, their opponent will get a 1-minute response time. Upon that, we will get into the Crossfire Round. In the Crossfire Round, each candidate has the opportunity to pose 2 questions to their opponent, to which their opponent and the candidate have a 2-minute debate time. In conclusion, each candidate will have an opportunity to make their final remarks. Now, we ask the candidates to please be respectful of each other, as well as be respectful of the time limit. We will hear, candidates, a 30-second warning bell, okay, which will indicate that you need to wrap up. You will then hear a buzzer. At that buzzer, your mics will then be silenced. So let's respect each other. Let's respect each other's time. There are 338 seats being contested in this federal election. We wish all of our candidates the best of luck. I'm excited, also a little nervous today because I'm excited to hear what all of our candidates have to say. So let's start tonight's debate by taking a look at what happened during Surrey Centre's 2019 federal election.
Surrey Centre. The riding of Surrey Centre is one of 5 federal electoral districts that covers the city of Surrey. Population of this seat is 118,410 people. out of which South Asian comprise of 35.1%, multiple minorities 1.5%, and visible minority about 0.7%. After English, the most common mother tongue in this riding is Punjabi. Immigrants make up 48% of the population, with the largest groups of recent immigrants coming from India, Iraq, and the party has been MP since 2015. He won again in 2019 with 37.4% of the votes. He got a total of 15,266 votes, followed by Sarjeet Singh Saran from NDP party, who got 11,166 votes. Tina Benz from Conservative Party, 10,413 votes, and John Waring from the Green Party, 2,505 votes, where from the People's Party of Canada, Jaswinder Singh Dilavri got 700 votes. And this year, that is 2021, the elected candidates are Randeep Sarai representing from the Liberal Party, Tina Benz from Conservative Party, Sonia Gandhi from NDP Party, Joe Kennedy from People's Party of Canada, and Felix Kongai from the Green Party.
Sarai and Sonia Gandhi tonight to tonight's federal election debate. We wish both of you the best of luck. We will now have our panelists ask Mr. Randeep Sarai his first question.
Before asking the first question, Randeep and Sonia, I want to thanks you guys came here, and we invited Tory candidate Tina Benz as well, but somehow she didn't show up. So my question to Randeep is, as a member of the International Trade and Human Rights Committees, what are your thoughts on the deteriorating relations between China and Canada?
It's a very good question. I'm not on the Human Rights Committee, but I'm on the International Trade Committee. So Canada has been working hard to diversify our economy so that we're not just reliant on the US or China. So we've created CETA, we've created CPTPP with other Asian countries besides China, so Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan, others in that program, so that we can diversify and not be reliant on that. But what we've done very firmly is stick to our roots on justice and on law and order, and have drawn a clear line to the Chinese government and anyone else for any political will, any hostile pressures, or any other tactics. We have been very firm in saying that our commitment to law and order, so regardless of who is charged and facing extradition, would have to face law and order, and no government intervention will happen in that, and a fair trial, a fair hearing, and a fair procedure will happen. And China needs to learn that that's how Canada operates. We've also gained the cooperation of the Americans, along with a lot of the Western countries, European Union, and others, who have also shown that support whenever it came to our two Michaels that are detained unlawfully and unfairly in China, as all the ambassadors from these countries have shown their support for Canada. So we'll continue that to do that work, and we'll also at the same time continue to ensure that fair trade and the rules of trade are obliged, whether it's in the WTO or any other trade agreement, specifically with China.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Randeep Singh Sarai. We will now have Sonia. You'll get a 1-minute response time.
So my response to that is that when we're talking about human rights, I think we really have to look at what China has been doing. And a big concern for Canadians is, and even as a local citizen, when we're talking about traveling to China, there are concerns about safety. And that's something that I feel that the government, or the Liberal Party as government, has not really been forceful enough about, where they have really not ensured that Canadians are safe. When we're talking about the two Michaels, it has been tragic, and it has been very, very stressful for us when we look at how they have been treated. And so there is this bargaining chip almost, where China is as an important trade partner, but they're also wielding a lot of power. And I think that power has really influenced how decisions are made. And whether we're talking about the two Michaels, whether we're talking about other human rights of the Uyghur Muslims that are being mistreated in China. I think we really need to take a strong stand in fighting for human rights and ensuring that Canadians are safe there.
Thank you very much, Sonia. We will now ask our panels to ask Ms. Sonia Andi her first question.
Hi, Sonia. My question is about the cell phone bills. So Canadians pay the most for their cell phone bills according to the international report. What will your party do to reduce this cost and relieve the burden?
So our leader Jagmeet Singh has been fighting for cell phone bills, making sure that life is more affordable for all Canadians, and especially cell phone bills and the service. When we look at rural communities, service is very sporadic, and cell phones or internet even is almost like a human right at this point, where people need to be able to access those services. And cell phones and the companies, there is such a monopoly of those companies that we need to ensure that cell phones, their rates are reduced so that all Canadians are able to access those services. And there really shouldn't be this barrier that a lot of families are facing. I work with a lot of marginalized families who are not able to access cell phones, and especially during the pandemic, we found that a lot of children were not able to access the services, attend school, because they did not have access to either cell phones or internet. So our party is absolutely ensuring that when we're talking about affordability, we are making sure that there is cell phone coverage, and it's fair cell phone coverage.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Mr. Randeep Singh Sarai, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
Sure. So we've addressed and we've actually looked at this issue very strongly. Our rural broadband initiatives have been one of the strongest this country's ever had. We've spent over $1.5 billion to bring broadband and internet connectivity at high speeds to rural, indigenous reserves, rural towns, or small places, low orbiting satellites, including one that's done by the Tesla founder, is now spanning across the north, giving more and more access. We're also piloting programs with those that are on low incomes and GIS supplements to get low income service plans for them at a very low cost. And we've also given an ultimatum to all the telco providers to reduce their bills by 20% by the end of the year, after which time those that have not will not be the beneficiaries of a lot of further advancements or further spectrum announcements. So the ultimatum has been given, and we're going to encourage that. Some of the service providers have already answered, and you start seeing a reduction in their billing, especially in the packaged billing that they have, and we'll do more work to make sure that everyone has connectivity and that the rates go down.
Thank you very much, Randeep. We will now ask our panelists to ask Ms. Sonia or Mr. Randeep Sarai his next question.
Yeah, Mr. Sarai, like in the COVID case, like Canadians are concerned with the abuse of the SERP during the pandemic. And will there be any audits and follow-ups that how the SERPs has been distributed?
Absolutely. Thank you. A really good question. Our first priority is make sure that every Canadian has a roof over their head, has food on their table, and does not skip their mortgage payments. So we ensured that 6 million people who lost their jobs or were nearly losing their jobs were able to have support from their government in a time of need. So we implemented the SERB program, which gave $2,500 to those that lost their jobs immediately in a very simple and easy format. We did not want them to have to hustle and go get a record of employment, get their tax information, because accountants were scared to have clients meet them. Employers were not able to get their HR offices to get them so quickly. And if we put it so cumbersome, you would have many people who missed their payments, missed their rent, and therefore would have felt expulsion or moving out of their homes. We have also said that this year, until the pandemic ceases by the end of this year, we will not be collecting or auditing those accounts. However, those that misuse those SERB funds, did not pay were not eligible for those, will have to pay them back and will face punitive penalties for taking SERB unlawfully. That has resulted already immediately 800,000 people returning their SERB payments and excess payments back, or those that felt they were ineligible. And those audits will happen afterwards. We're not going to do that during COVID. We will do that after, and they will face those penalties.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarai. Sonia, you will now have a 1 minute response time.
I think, firstly, we have to acknowledge the part that our leader Jagmeet Singh has played in ensuring that CERB benefits were sufficient enough for all Canadians. So the Liberal Party and Mr. Trudeau were originally proposing about $1,000 to each Canadian or whoever qualified, whereas our leader, Mr. Jagmeet Singh, ensured that there was enough money for all Canadians who qualified. So that was one thing that we and he fought for, to ensure that people were getting the help that they needed. Secondly, the way this was rolled out was very complicated, was confusing, and even though Mr. Sarai says that it wasn't, I can vouch for quite a few people who did not apply for the fear of retribution. They felt that they qualified, but they were not getting the correct answers, whether they really qualified. So I know of people personally that did not apply for that CERB benefit. In the meantime, what we have seen is the corporations, the ultra-rich, the wealthy, and the big corporations who have misused not necessarily the CERB benefits, but wage subsidies and tax subsidies during the pandemic. And they have, and there's been no accountability for that, where a lot of times those benefits were given so that people could actually, the employees could get the benefit from the companies. However, those companies ended up giving dividends to their shareholders, CEOs got bonuses, and there looks like there's been no accountability for that piece. So I feel that CERB was very important to ensure that people got the help that they needed, but there were a lot of people that missed. And right now, when we look at seniors whose guaranteed income supplement has been clawed back because they got the CERB benefit, I think that was just rolled out in a very poor fashion. And now seniors are left without the income that they were relying on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Our panelists, we now ask you to ask Ms. Sonia Andy her second question of the evening.
Hi, Sonia. Foreign interference in Canadian election process is an issue for our intelligence agencies. They gave numerous statements, even this year, that China, India, Russia. So according to a CISA statement issued this year, there is a high chance of foreign interference in our election process. Minimize the risk.
I think it is the responsibility of the government, of the intelligence agencies, to ensure that this is not happening, because democracy, I mean, elections are such a democratic process that we have to make sure that people are able to choose their candidates, they are able to choose their representatives in a fair, free manner. And so when these interferences are happening, I really believe that the intelligence service, and especially when this has been pointed out and there is an awareness of this concern, then we have to make sure that processes are put in place, and the intelligence services are working really hard to ensure that it's a fair and democratic process, because people place a lot of trust in the election and in democracy, especially in a country like Canada. We want to make sure that we are electing the right people in a fair manner. So I really think that it's up to the government to ensure that there are firm restrictions and there are also firm consequences for acts like these.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Mr. Randeep Sarai, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
Sure. This is a problem democracies around the world are facing. Canada recognized this. We've seen this happen in the U.S. as well. Canada set up a $1.8 billion cybersecurity center, which is 50% of that is for defense and foreign interference on our soils, and also for our corporations that have intelligence being hacked or corporate and patents being stolen. So what they're doing is thwarting the largest source of foreign interference was through cyber and through internet, to thwart those right at the root. So we've invested in that, invested and built one of the largest cybersecurity centers in the world. We've also created legislation that will stop anyone emitting hate or intolerance against others. So on social media outlets, on press and internet and press, where if it's emitting hate, so not on freedom of speech, but when it's emitting hate or inciting violence, the government can step up and shut those those social media outlets or broadcasters out, or that person that's doing that. So we've brought in the tools to control that. We've also made it loudly clear through our Global Affairs Center, our Foreign Service, that we will not tolerate any such activity, and therefore any embassy or any country that is doing such activities, their representatives will be forewarned and action will be taken against them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarai. We will now ask our panel to ask Mr. Randeep Sarai his third and final question.
Randeep, my question is about the Canadian citizens and PRs who are stuck in India due to the direct flight restrictions due to the COVID-19. Don't you think this is government's responsibility to bring those PRs and Canadians back home?
Look, as a government, it's our responsibility first and foremost to keep Canadians safe. That's our first and foremost priority. The second is obviously to bring any Canadian that wishes to come back safely and in a secure manner back to Canada. What we have implemented is as a result of a large amount of COVID cases, particularly the Delta variant coming through every flight that was arriving from India. In most cases, the average is almost 2%. So that's 5 to 6 people that, despite having tests done in India prior to departure and on arrival here, they were still coming through with those cases. Countries that did not thwart those travel arrangements, like the US and England, saw a massive spike, and in fact the US has over 200,000 daily cases of the Delta variant because of that inadequacy and on them controlling the aerial flights. So Canada has put an extra screen, an extra layer of screening, saying, look, you must take your test there. Also, you go through a third country where you do the test again. So some of them are genuine tests done before, but therefore they may catch it prior to their departure and therefore might bring it back after being tested, or therefore they'll be screened in the second country, whether that's Mexico, Serbia, or otherwise. And thirdly, when they land here, they'll be screened again. So it's an extra layer of defense for Canadians. I think that's a small price to pay to ensure that Canadians remain safe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarai. Sonia, you'll now have 1 minute to respond.
I would say that the handling of the pandemic has been absolutely poor right from the start. When we saw COVID striking in China and after that in Italy, there really was no preparation in Canada, even though we knew how bad the numbers were, how high the numbers were. And I remember when I was flying back from a different country, and I was flying back in the middle of February, my daughter phoned me and she said, Mom, just make sure you wear a mask. Things are pretty bad in China. So I come to Canada, I come to the airport, and there was no screening whatsoever. The only question that was asked at the console was, have you been in contact with anyone in Wuhan? Of course I hadn't, but I could have been in contact with anyone who had had second or third hand contact with people in Wuhan. So I think the way this pandemic was dealt with by the Liberal government right from the start was really poorly mishandled. And so now the direction, there was no clear direction given to people who were traveling to India. And so I think if there had been a clearer statement that we are not really advised to go to India, and at the same time, they're there. The Canadian government has a responsibility to its people. You cannot leave them abandoned and stranded there for months on end. So I really think that the way this pandemic has been handled from the start has been poorly handled.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sonia Andi. Our panelists will now ask Ms. Sonia Andi her third and final question.
Yeah, Sonia, like in Canada now, the housing affordability is a big concern, and your leader Jagmeet Singh always talk about the affordability. But issue is here, like municipalities always control the development process here, and the provincial government control the agriculture land. If you will form the government, how you can handle this situation?
I think affordability is absolutely a huge concern for all Canadians, and especially Surrey Centre that I'm representing. It is an absolute concern. It's also a very high density area. So I understand that there is the focus on ensuring that in high density areas there is more housing, which helps with transportation, and reducing other costs. Yet I think we have to work with all levels of government. We also have to ensure that we're looking at various situations and issues such as the climate crisis. Now, when you look at Surrey Centre and especially Central City, that tends to be the hotspot of all of Surrey, where the temperature rises extremely in the summertime. And that is because of all the high rises and very low tree cover. And so we have to make sure that when we're also talking about affordable housing, we're ensuring that those are good living conditions for people. And when we talk about affordable housing, it actually has to be affordable, because right now there is a lot of construction, but most of it is profit-based. So our government, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP will fight for the rights of the people, but we'll also work with all levels of government to ensure that we are addressing transportation needs, we're ensuring that housing at an affordable level is provided to people.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sonia Andi. Randeep Sarai, you'll now have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. Unlike my colleague, I'll answer the question. I think our government has committed $4 billion to give the city halls and districts so that they can actually increase supply, reduce times for building permits, development permits, so that the cost doesn't get to the consumer, including ideas, like you said, perhaps of getting land that's not currently allocated for development and able to bring it to affordable housing. So that would mean more plan checkers, more building inspectors. In a city would have a specific guideline and test and rules. If they're able to reduce that timeline by, say, 50%, they will get X amount of dollars in order to hire more staff, in order to give our residents homes quicker and faster. Because we all know if we don't do that, the added cost is to the consumer. If something takes 5 years to make, the developer is going to build in the interest for 5 years. He's going to build in his own profit in speculation for 5 years. And all that is going to delay the ability of somebody to get into their first home for 5 years. But if we can reduce that time to 1 year, 6 months, 2 years, we will reduce the cost burden on that family, will increase supply, and will create more jobs while doing it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarai. Sonia, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
To the same.
Oh, sorry, my bad. I got so excited by what you were saying. I'm like, let this conversation continue. No, for sure, no. Okay, great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the Crossfire Round. In this Crossfire Round, we will begin with Mr. Sarai. You will pose a question to Ms. Sonia Andi, and from there we will have an open 2-minute debate.
Sonia, Quebec's Bill C-21 is seen by visible minorities, particularly people like myself who wear a turban and have visible religious headgear, as a very discriminatory and infringement on their constitutional rights. All parties have condemned this act, but many have chosen not to take a strong action. In fact, the only one leader has said that they will take this, they'll take this federally if all other measures fail, and that is Justin Trudeau. Can you tell me why Jagmeet Singh ruled out intervening in such a discriminatory policy that posed a threat to minorities of all faiths?
Well, all I can say is that when we look at the track record of Jagmeet Singh, he is always fighting for marginalized people. He himself, being a person of color, wearing a turban, I can assure you that he will fight for the rights of the people and himself. So I think that if there hasn't been a statement, there will be a statement from him, and especially because when we are talking about rights of marginalized people, of visible minorities, and the discriminatory practices, especially in Quebec, we have to make sure that those are being addressed, because people, and we look at Jagmeet Singh as a representative, as a leader who will fight for those issues. So I have full faith in our leader, and I have full faith that he will make a statement that will be impactful and will be actionable.
But he's already ruled it out. He said, I will not have any federal intervention in that matter. So despite looking like a visible minority, wearing the religious significant attire and of a Sikh, he has said as a federal leader, and he is the federal leader, he's not a provincial leader,
Yep.
He said he will not intervene in that. And that's simply just to get votes in that province or for some other reasons. But what do you have to say to Amrit Kaur or others who had to leave the province and lose their jobs because of such discriminatory practice, that your federal leader has said he will not intervene in that?
Well, I can only assure you that for me as a representative, we will make sure that people are not discriminated against. And so if he has taken that stance for now, and I can also say that Mr. Trudeau has also made different statements at different times in order to win the votes. So if
Sonia, sorry, thank you so much. The time is now up. I just want to remind all of our candidates that when you hear that bell, that is a 30-second warning to wrap up your thoughts. At that point, when you hear the buzzer, your mic is then silenced. So now we'll move on to Ms. Sonia Andy. Sonia, you may pose a question to which there will be a 2-minute open debate.
Okay. So the NDP has pledged to eliminate prescription drug costs, and Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal government have been promising to lower drug costs since 2015. So after 6 years, we're hearing the same promises from your party. Why should Canadians believe that you will follow through with that promise now?
Sure, and thank you for asking that. We've already done the first Hoskins report, which was done in the first years, to find out how we can actually develop a actual viable pharmacare plan. That has been done, after which we devised a plan of how to buy drugs at a much lower cost by collectively buying them on behalf of all Canadians, so all provinces. And I'm proud to say just a few weeks ago, Nova Scotia was the first province to actually implement a pharmacare plan with the federal government, and we're going to work with every single province, just like we did $10 a day childcare. We announced it. We did our first deal here in British Columbia, and other deals like Manitoba have already been done. We are actually speaking with action, and pharmacare is next on the table. Just like one province has already implemented it, we will do it on the rest of the provinces as well.
Right, and so, however, we have seen that pharmacare has been on the table for many years. The Liberals have been promising that for many years. What we tend to find is that when it's election time, that's when a lot of promises or action is taken. Same thing with $10 childcare. You know, that is something that the NDP has been proposing for a long time. So just going back to pharmacare, what has taken so long, and how come these promises are somewhat being delivered when it's close to the election?
No, in fact, it was done right after the 2015 mandate. The report was commenced immediately. It took former Minister of Health Hoskins a few years to develop that by consulting with every single member of parliament, every single premier of the country, and first leaders of the territories, and then dealing with the best way to actually implement it so it's cost effective and it saves Canadians money. And after that, the second phase was implemented to reduce the cost of drugs when they're purchased, and the first agreement's already been done. So he'll continue, leadership of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will continue and implement those going forward.
However, I can say that the Conservatives as well as the Liberals have voted down.
Sorry, Sonia. So when that buzzer goes, when you hear that bell, you got 30 seconds to take the train to the station.
Yeah.
So we're now going to move on to Mr. Randeep Sarai. You may now pose a question to which there will be a 2-minute, it's an open debate. So please feel free to interject when you feel the need to.
Sure. Canadians know that the NDP has committed to a very ambitious target of building 500,000 new homes across Canada to combat housing affordability. However, the NDP hasn't given any pricing strategy on how they intend to accomplish this into reality. How much will it cost the federal government to buy 500,000 or build 500,000 new homes? How much would it cost someone to access these homes? And would certain groups be prioritizing gaining access to those homes? If so, who'd be determined?
So I can definitely say that the NDP has a plan for funding the proposals that are being put forth. And the big one is that we want to make sure that we're taxing the ultra-rich, the big corporations that rarely contribute, that rarely pay any taxes. So there is a huge amount of money that has lied, that has not been accessed for the average Canadian. So we're always concerned about how the average Canadian and their taxes will be increased. So that is where I feel the money will come from. But of course, the details will be released later, but I can say that in fact, the NDP is the only party that has a plan for how these proposals will be funded. Whereas when we look at the Liberals or the Conservatives, there really is no plan about how all of these, the actions or the promises will be delivered to Canadians.
I've looked at your plan. I've went through the NDP platform even today prior to coming. I could see no cost in it. I saw no plan in it. I don't know how much it's going to cost. Your platform platform's already out. Ours is expected to come out shortly. So how is a Canadian to decide on what your plan's going to be? How can they know what it's going to cost, how much you're going to get from the ultra rich, and how much is it going to cost to build those houses, and where are you going to get the resources to do it, and how much will it cost? I'm baffled at that, because you've already unveiled your platform, but there is no numbers in there.
Right, and I think what is really telling is that the Liberals have still not unveiled their platform. We're 2 weeks into the election, and we still don't know what the Liberals stand for.
Well, we have a national housing strategy. We've committed $70 billion. $3 billion's already come in British Columbia. Hundreds of homes have already been developed here in Surrey for affordable housing. We've had transitional homes for women. We've had homes for at-risk youth.
And
but I don't see any dollar, any amount at all under the NDP plan. And so I'm still baffled to see where you're going to get the money and how much it's going to cost.
We have a plan, and we have actually unveiled that in our platform, whereas the Liberals have not disclosed.
All right, so we are now going to move on to the last question of the Crossfire Round. Ms. Sonia Andy, you may now pose your question, which will be open again to a 2-minute debate.
Okay. So the Liberal and Conservative parties having a track record of giving the ultra-rich a free ride. You voted against taxation. You've allowed billionaires to get richer through the pandemic. How is your party planning to make life affordable for Canadians? How will you pay for the supports we desperately need?
So I can proudly say that we've lifted 1.3 million people out of poverty in the last 6 years, 435,000 children out of poverty, 900,000 adults out of poverty. This is real numbers. It's been the largest poverty reduction ever in the history of Canada. This is the type of real numbers that need to be seen. I remember when I got elected in 2015, several schools had breakfast programs where kids were coming to school, skipping a meal, putting water instead of milk in their cereals. We don't have that severity of the problem anymore. We had a street that had we had a strip where there was tent city in it. We immediately had 160 modular homes, 250 permanent now homes. We've actually delivered concrete results. In the pandemic, we showed that when a government is needed and needs to be relied on at the most, we can deliver. And therefore we've actually brought over 750,000 jobs back. Of the 3 million that were unemployed due to COVID, 2.75 have already gone back to their jobs. And in BC, I can proudly say we have the same record low unemployment rate that was prior to the pandemic.
I think these numbers are really great to hear, but when we're looking at people on the streets, when we're looking at the people in Surrey Centre, the people that I work with on a daily basis, those numbers really mean not much. When I'm working with clients whose children are going home hungry, and all we're able to do is give them gift cards to just make them last for a day or two. So those numbers may be impressive, Mr. Sarai, but I don't think it's enough. I really think
we've given
that we have to...
$100 million, just I can give in Surrey Centre alone, $109 million annually for Canada Child Benefits for the most needy. It's tax-free. It goes directly to the parents, and it goes directly to those children for their benefit. That is unprecedented. Under the Conservatives, that funding was taxed. So at the end of the year, you had to pay taxes. We've doubled and tripled that funding, and it's been the most robust funding for children and families.
I think we have to look at the real...
Sorry, Vandeep and Sonia, time is now up. We're now going to move into our closing remarks. We'll start with Mr. Vandeep Singh Sarai. You'll have 1 minute to give your closing remarks tonight.
I want to thank my colleague for joining and putting her name in this. Anybody is commendable to do a public service and run, so I want to commend her on that. I want to say, before I ran in 2015, Surrey was a neglected city. Our federal governments under the Conservatives prior had no infrastructure dollars ever invested in this city. Despite being the second largest city and soon to eclipse becoming the largest city, there's no infrastructure, whether it was under an NDP MP, whether it's under a Conservative, whether it is under a Reform member, there was no infrastructure dollars put in. Ever since we've been elected, we have brought $1.3 billion a regional development agency with a budget of $550 million, a Veterans Affairs Centre, Simon Fraser's new $125 million engineering campus. So we've shown that Surrey is something important to Ottawa, and we brought real dollars to here. So if you want that to continue on September 20th, vote for Randeep Sarai, vote for a Liberal government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarai. Ms. Sonia Andy, you will now have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Thank you, Channel Punjabi, for hosting me. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Mr. Sarai, as well, and Mandeep. Just quickly before I get into my remarks is that those numbers, those buildings sound fantastic, but when we're looking at the lives of people in Surrey Centre, they are suffering. They are talking about affordability, and they are talking about the challenges that they have been facing, and people are angry. People are angry with the Liberal government because for 6 years there have been broken promises, promise after promise. So I would be honoured to serve the people of Surrey Centre. You're my friends, you're my neighbours. I have worked as a social worker and a mental health counsellor, and I've seen firsthand how people are impacted by the decisions of the Liberals. I want to create...
Thank you so much, Sonia. Randeep and Sonia, I want to thank both of you and the Liberal and NDP parties for coming out tonight. We wish you both the best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now be moving on to the riding of Surrey Newton, where we will have Mr. Sukh Taliwal as well as Avneet Johal joining us today. Let's take a look at what the results were from the 2019 federal election in the electoral district of Surrey Newton.
Surrey Newton constituency. Population of this seat 113,490. South Asian 60.7%. Multiple minorities are 1.1% and visible minorities 0.3%. Immigrants make up over 51% of the riding's population, with the large groups of recent immigrants coming from India, Pakistan and the Philippines. In 2019, incumbent Liberal MP Sukh Taliwal won a second term as Surrey Newton MP by collecting 45% of the votes. He got a total of 18,328 votes, followed by Harjeet Singh Gill, 11,854 votes, Harpreet Singh from Conservative Party, 8,501, 11 votes, Rabab Khera from Green Party, 1,296 votes, and Holly Verschere, 669 votes from People's Party. And this year, that is 2021, the elected candidates are Sukh Taliwal from Liberal Party, Saeed Mohsin, Conservative Party, People's Party of Canada, Jennifer Singh, and Avneet Johal from NDP.
Welcome back. And thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Sukh Taliwal and Mr. Avneet Johal. We will begin tonight's debate with our first question for Mr. Sukh Taliwal from our panel.
Before questioning, I just want to thank Sukh Taliwal and Avneet Johal for joining us. We also invited Conservative candidate Saeed Mohsin, but he didn't show up, so I thanks both of you. My question to Sukh is, Surrey has witnessed a hike in gang-related violence and murders while you were in this area as an MP. In the recent years, there was a funding announcement of $7.5 million to battle these gang violence. Where was this funding allotted and utilized? And are you sure the funding gone in right hands?
First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Sohta, for this question. In fact, it's timely. And when we talk about that $7.5 million, we as a federal government given it to the city of Surrey because the people on the grassroots can make better decisions, and city of Surrey partnered with 10 different agencies to deliver 11 different programs to help 4,700 youth at risk of getting involved in gang and guns. And out of that, so far the progress is 2,500 people has been served. Out of that, 2,100 has been children and 320 parents and their caregivers. And once again, this money is gone to City of Surrey, and City of Surrey was the administrator of this $7.5 million.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taliwal. Mr. Johal, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Bonjour, tous mes amis francophones. Before I begin responding to the first question, I appreciate the question. It's important for our community. And I will also share, it makes me very, very sad that we are still talking about this issue. We are still talking about safety in the communities here in Surrey. To any family that's been impacted by gang violence, my heart goes out to you. Nobody should have to go through what you have had to go through, and our political leaders, our community representatives, should be doing more to ensure that we don't have to keep dealing with this. The numbers might sound impressive, but I think we all know the situation is as dark as it has been before, still in Surrey Newton.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johal. I just want to remind both our candidates that when you are posed a question, you will have 2 minutes to respond, and you will hear a bell. The bell is an indicator that you have 30 seconds left to your response time, and once you hear the buzzer, your mics are silenced. So we're being very strict with the time, but note that the bell is your 30-second warning to wrap up. All right, we will now move on to our first question for Mr. Johal from the panel.
Hi, Avneet. My question is, you have entered politics and this is your first run federally, as per my knowledge. Do you think there should be a limit on number of terms a person can represent a particular riding?
That's a great question. Personally, I don't think that we need term limits at this stage. I don't think we've seen anything in Canadian politics or Canadian history that suggests that this is a concern or a challenge. I think if people in the community told me otherwise, that we could certainly think about that. I think one of the things that I would like to stress is the role of Member of Parliament is not necessarily just to put forward what we think or what we need for ourselves. We need to listen to our constituents and to our community members. And I can tell you, not one person has said to me that this is a concern. People are concerned about affordability, people are concerned about housing, people are concerned about safety, and so this is not something that I'm thinking about actively, no.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Johal. Mr. Taliwal, you'll now have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. First of all, I would agree with Mr. Johal that question shouldn't be even the number of terms or the length of the service. The question should come down to what the elected representative can do for its constituents. And I can tell you, Surrey Newton being the highest caseload in whole of Canada, I'm very proud of the service that I have provided and how hard I worked from day one to today.
Okay, so Mr. Taliwal, you still have another few seconds until you hear the buzzer if you want to add to that.
All I wanted to say is certainly I'm very proud of my record as a member of parliament. People from across Canada called me because of my accessibility and working hard around the clock. And if things want to get done, they know how to get it done is come back to Surrey Newton, and that's where it get done.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Taliwal. Again, the bell is a 30-second warning, and the buzzer is your final. Your mic is then silenced. We will now ask the panel to pose their second question to Mr. Taliwal.
Mr. Sok, immigration is always a hot topic in our community, and you were the member of the Citizenship and Immigration. So there is talk about in the community as well that the labor market opinion process has been misused and abused. So why has this been allowed to continue even after numerous fraud cases has been identified, and still it's a big issue for the community?
Mr. Thenda, actually, excellent question. Again, this has been an issue, and we are very well aware of this issue, and that is why, we have worked hard and we brought in, the investigations. We brought in additional officers to investigate the companies that are doing this fraud with the LMIAs, and moreover, we brought in an open work process. If an employee is being harassed or abused because of this LMIA issue, that person can go to CBSA and can get an open work permit. And not only that, in fact, I take a pride that I sit on the immigration committee, and I have always championed to make sure, that we give chance to low and mid-skill workers that are already in Canada. And when we brought in 27,232 applications for express entry with 75 points, the lowest ever, that gave people opportunity not to be the victim of this abuse. And not only that, in fact, afterwards we brought in 90 more thousand applications for those, like 40,000 students, 30,000 essential workers, and 20,000 workers to do with the healthcare. What the 90,000 is going to do is those 90,000 people did not need the LMIA to get their application processed. And this is the type of policies we have to bring. And I can tell you, I'm very proud of our record as a government when it comes to immigration, unparalleled. And we will continue to work that there's no abuse left when it comes to LMIA or any abuse to any of the immigrant workers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Johal, you will now have 1 minute response time.
Thank you very much. Again, we all know how broken the immigration system is and how broken it has been under the Liberal government. As an immigrant myself, and as somebody who has worked for the Canada Border Services Agency, referenced by my colleague Mr. Dhaliwal, I have a good understanding and a good knowledge of both the fields of customs and immigration. Also here in Surrey, we know how important immigration is to our communities, and we know how important immigration is to the fabric of this country. Under this Liberal government, far too many people have had to wait to stay apart from their families until they can be reunited under the family reunification system. And we all know the stories of all the educated people who have struggled to have their qualifications honored here in Canada. The system is broken, it continues to be broken, and it has been for the past 6 years under this government.
Thank you, Mr. Johal. We will now ask our panel to pose their second question to Mr. Johal.
Hi, Avneet. Your party has proposed a 20% foreign buyer tax, and as well as Jagmeet Singh today said, there will be a capital tax, capital gain tax, 75% as well. So many people residing in your riding work in the construction industry, in the development industry. Don't you feel that it will hurt the business and the community?
It's a great question, and I will take some challenge to how you've presented the question, and I'll start with a capital gains tax. Yes, that is going to increase under an NDP government, but it's also important to recognize that that $1 billion tax benefit goes to almost all of it goes to 88% of people in this country. So we have always been a champion of small business. We will continue to be a champion of small business. We have proposed lowering taxes on small businesses. And so I don't think that this should be framed as somehow an attack on everyday regular people. Now, my parents and I rent our home here in Surrey Newton, and we understand the concerns about housing affordability. I was connecting with families last week, and I asked some of the younger community members what they would like for me to say if I get sent to Ottawa. 10-year-old Munthaj, and I hope she's watching tonight, she told me that she worries about housing affordability, and as a 10-year-old, she's telling me that she's concerned she'll never have a place to live. So we must take action to ensure that our young people are supported, the dream of home ownership can remain alive, and that will take bold action from any government that comes into office and comes into Ottawa. Our friends, our families, we're all talking about how expensive everything is, and we can see what's happening with our housing market. I don't need to explain that to anybody who's watching tonight. The NDP does have ambitious plans to make sure everybody can afford a place to call home. We can start this work using federal lands, and we can streamline application processes to make sure communities can start and complete projects sooner so that everybody has a safe and a secure home.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. As Mr. Johal talked about affordability, this 20% tax on foreign buyers is not going to deter foreign buyers from entering the Canadian market. You know, when it comes to affordability, we got to make sure that we have a bold policy, and that is where we are bringing in a bold policy to ban foreign buyers to have any house bought in Canada for the next 2 years. Not only that, in fact, when Mr. Johal talked about being renting, we are going to make sure that we help people from renting to owning the home, and also build 1.4 million homes or renovate the homes to bring in an affordability.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dhaliwal. Our panelists will now ask Mr. Dhaliwal his third and final question.
Mr. Dhaliwal, during your terms as a representative of Surrey Newton riding, what funding and or the community-based projects have been brought to the riding?
Excellent question. And the first one that I will mention, I take a pride, when it comes to Surrey Newton, when it comes to Canada Child Benefit, this is the constituency that receives the highest amount in rest of Canada. Over $100 million come to Surrey Newton every year with helping 25,000 young children to lift them out of poverty. Not only that, in fact, during this summer, we brought in $2 million to help summer student jobs, which was 4 times than the previous jobs. And then we already asked me question, in fact, by one of the panel members, $7.5 million for a SAFE program to make sure that it helps 4,700 youth at risk, which are prone to getting into gangs and guns. Besides this, we can talk about $17 million in affordable housing, extension for the KPU University, $40 million for SFU, and most importantly, $1.3 billion for the SkyTrain extension. I'm very proud of my record, and I'm very proud of my government's record when it comes to delivering to Surrey Newton and Surrey.
Thank you, Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Johal, you will have a 1-minute response time.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I'll need 1 minute to respond to all of that, but I will share a few points. The first point is, when you hear someone say they have lifted so many children out of poverty as if it's a positive thing, I ask you the question, why are there so many children in poverty that need to be lifted out of poverty in the first place? We talked about term limits. Our MP, Mr. Dhaliwal, has been an MP in this constituency, in this city, for a very long time. And today, he's telling you, during that time, all these children have been in poverty, and now we're starting to lift them out. It's because we have so many children in poverty. This is nothing to be proud of. It is shameful that so many children have needed to be lifted out of poverty, and so many more still remain in that situation. This is not a good thing.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Johal. Our panelists will now ask Mr. Johal his last and final question of the evening.
Yeah, Mr. Johal, Afghanistan situation is a very important issue at this time, and the Canadian response to the situation is under a lot of public scrutiny. What would your party done to handle this situation differently?
Again, fantastic question. I'm really glad that you've asked this. The first thing that I'd like to share is that the world generally is in a difficult position. And I'll get to Afghanistan in just a moment. We're facing the climate crisis. We have more refugees today and internally displaced people than we've ever had before. We are seeing growing right-wing extremism across different parts of the world. And there's an opportunity for Canada to play an important role in global affairs. And we're not seeing this. International assistance under this government has fallen to its lowest level in 50 years. Canada was rejected a seat for a second time at the United Nations Security Council. Our role and influence in the world is being damaged by this Liberal government. And so that in turn limits the amount of work that we can do to cooperate with our international partners to have a successful mission in Afghanistan. The NDP, in fact, lots of folks in Canada, including members of the Liberal Party, have been saying that we have known about this situation in Afghanistan for a long time. We have known for several months the United States would be withdrawing, and we could have predicted, and we should have predicted, and many did predict, that this was the tragic situation that was going to unfold. When we were going to see some of these tragedies unfold in Afghanistan, the Prime Minister found it suitable and fit to call this election. We shouldn't be having an election right now. We should be dealing with the climate crisis in British Columbia, and we should be dealing with issues abroad like we're seeing in Afghanistan. That it was shortly, moments, hours after finding out that these things were happening in Afghanistan that the Prime Minister felt, no, it's my priority now to call an election. This should tell you everything you need to know about where this person's priority lies and where this government's priorities lie. And so the NDP government, I can tell you, would have prioritized the safety of Canadians and the safety of our partners and friends everywhere around the world. We would not have called this election.
Thank you, Mr. Johal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will now have a 1-minute response time.
Thank you. We all know that NDP never had to make tough decisions because on an international scene, they have never formed a government on a national level, and they have made no decisions, when it comes to, but I can certainly tell you when it comes to Afghanistan, our government is diligent. My office is in fact very diligent. When the people from other constituencies are not answered where they are coming, to Surrey Newton from, a lot of people can witness that I'm helping individuals. When it comes to our government, we have already lifted 3,700 wonderful people from Afghan, and we will continue to do that. And in previously, we have also helped people from Sikh and Hindu minorities to come to Canada, and we will continue to do that work to make sure that Canadians are lifted and the people that help Canadians are lifted out of Afghanistan in a safe manner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thaliwal. We are now going to move into our Crossfire Round. In this round, each candidate will have the opportunity to pose 2 questions to their opponent, in which there will be a 2-minute open debate. Right? Please be respectful of the time. Again, you will hear the bell. That's a 30-second warning to wrap it up. And at the buzzer, your mic is then silenced. So we're going to start with Mr. Thaliwal. You have the opportunity here to ask and pose a question to Mr. Johal. And then the both of you are then able to have a 2-minute debate on the topic.
Mr. Johal, NDP has been continuously asked, whether they will prop up the Conservative government under O'Toole. And because there's no answer so far from your leader. Right now, if we look at this way, voting for NDP is voting for O'Toole and the Conservative government. Why would your leader not come truthful to the public what his decision is going to be?
I'd like to say that's a good question, but I can't honestly say that it is. Why would an NDP leader be thinking about working with anybody else? We are focused on forming a government in this country, we are focused on people, and we are focused on building communities all across this country. We are asking voters to go to the polls, and we are asking voters, which party do you think aligns most with your values? Values of fairness, values of compassion, values of honesty, and values of transparency in our government. That question has no place for a federal leader of the NDP. So I can't say it's a good question. Now, I will add to that, when you say that a vote for the NDP is a vote for somebody else, it is so sad that your government promised before 2015 that that was going to be the final election in this country that was first past the post. So questions of strategic voting were supposed to have ended with your government. It has been 6 years and you have not fulfilled that promise. And constituents have told me that they are now NDP supporters and they are championing the cause of Jagmeet Singh because we will finally have a modern democratic system and proportional representation for all Canadians in this country.
Mr. Johal, you talked about environment. You talked about poverty. I can tell you the last time I remember, in 2005, the Liberal government signed Kyoto, signed Kelowna Accord to help Indigenous people.
Fantastic.
And we also signed Canada Child Benefits. And you know what happened? NDP supported the Conservative government at that time to bring the Liberal government down. And you know what happened? Kyoto, gone. Kelowna, gone.
Mr. Thaliwal, even if Kyoto were still here, this government has never met one of its climate targets. Not one.
All targets.
Ever,
I tell you,
ever.
By 2050,
you have never met
we will have
one.
a zero net
By
emissions.
2050, we will have no targets left to meet because civilization may not be the way that it is today. We can't wait until 2050.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Johal and Mr. Thaliwal. When you hear remember the bells, your 30-second warning. At the buzzer, unfortunately, your mics are then silenced. Mr. Johal, you now have the opportunity to pose a question to Mr. Thaliwal, on which you are able to have then a 2-minute debate.
Okay. Well, I was going to pose a different question, but I was so surprised in our previous conversations about how you described this government's approach to Afghanistan as diligent. I think people in Surrey Newton and across this country should be very, very deeply worried if the pictures they're seeing on their TV screens, if that's what diligent means to this government. So I'm going to ask a question about foreign affairs. Your leader and the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, talks about Canada having a feminist foreign policy. I'm wondering if you can explain to Canadians what that means and how does that align with selling billions of dollars of arms and weapons to a nation like Saudi Arabia? And how is it that under your government, we have been the second largest arms supplier to the Middle East? So what is a feminist foreign policy, and how does that fit into it?
When it comes to foreign policy, I can take a pride, that the Liberals have had a balanced policy. It came to Syria, when 2015 election we were going through. We had seen the crisis there, and which government that came up and helped those Syrian refugees to come here is liberal government, right? And now comes to Afghanistan issue, and the government has shown
Can
a
you please
leadership.
explain what a feminist foreign policy is? I'm not sure what that means.
20,000 Afghanistan.
I don't want
refugees that's going to
numbers, I
come.
want an explanation. What is a feminist foreign policy? What does that mean?
But certainly, when it comes to the foreign affairs policy, we got to be fair.
What does a feminist foreign policy mean? Your prime minister and your leader keeps talking about it. What does it mean? Because I can't figure it out when you're sending arms, billions of dollars worth of weapons to a country like Saudi Arabia.
I'm
What
telling
is
you,
a feminist foreign policy?
When it comes to liberals, we always been the peacekeeper. Okay?
And why were we rejected a
that
seat
is
at the UN
exactly what we
Security
did.
Council?
You know, that's what we did. And in fact,
You
when it
spent
comes
millions
to
of
NATO,
dollars
we
of
are the
taxpayer
only
money.
government, I tell you right now. And it was the conservative. I hope the conservative was here to answer, but I can tell you, if there is one government that came forward when it comes to the international policy, making sure that
Sure.
the vulnerable people are the ones that are helped, it is the liberal government.
So
it is
you
the
haven't
Prime
answered,
Minister Justin
my
Trudeau.
question. You've talked about other stuff, and I will just share this. If you want to talk about Canada having a balanced and fair foreign policy, it's complete nonsense. Look at the past 10 years. Our foreign policy has been in disarray. Your government spent millions of dollars, over $2 million of taxpayer money, on some sort of campaign to get a seat at the UN Security Council. Your government failed. Last year, the international community said, no. We do not want Canada to have this seat because your foreign policy does not meet with our international partners. It's been a disaster from the start, and it continues to be that way.
All right, gentlemen, the time for that question is now up. Mr. Thaliwal, you may now pose a question to which there will be...
The constituent people knew that Sukh Dhaliwal is a Surrey Newton person. I want to know whether your heart is here in Surrey Newton or still in Vancouver.
Okay, it's a fine question, and I'm really glad you've asked. What you're talking about are challenges that are faced by so many young people in Surrey. It is unfortunate, and I would say sad, that so many people are forced out of the community to find gainful employment, to find jobs that pay a good wage, or to find an affordable place to live. And so if you are suggesting in some way that I should be penalized or criticized for making my way through this world and doing what I can to support my family, shame on you, sir. It's really offensive for you to say that to young people. If you can't find a place to grow,
all I
live,
asked
and
you is
support your
heart.
family in
Is
Surrey,
it your heart here or is it in Vancouver? It's a direct
What you
question. I'm
haven't-
not telling you
Sure.
to move, but I'm just still asking. You have not answered because you seeked the nomination in Falls Creek in Vancouver.
I did.
And all I'm asking is a simple question: is your heart still in Vancouver or your heart is here?
my heart will always be with my community, and for the past 15 years,
But
I have
community-
been active.
is it community
I have
here
been-
in Surrey
For
Newton,
the past
or is
15
it in the
years, I
Vancouver?
have been active with the NDP in Surrey Newton. I have worked on provincial campaigns. I have worked on federal campaigns. I have run local youth leadership camps in Surrey. I have played ice hockey in Surrey. My home is in Surrey. My family is in Surrey. My community is in Surrey, and it is offensive and shameful for you to suggest anything otherwise because I have had to move so I can be closer
I
to
asked
my
you
work.
a simple question, and you still haven't said.
and you know what
when
the
you
answer
ran
is.
in Falls Creek, was your heart in Vancouver or in Surrey Newton? And I can tell you, my record is very clear.
Your
I
record-
raised
your
my
record-
family
your record
here.
is
my
very
elderly
clear.
parents lived here. I ran the business and still run the business. Employed 20 local people right here.
My family is a small business. My family is a small business family here in Surrey Newton. And to all the young people out there, you can go wherever you need to go to make your way in this world. Your home can still be, and your heart can still be right here in Surrey, right here in Surrey Newton.
Okay, gentlemen, right on the buzzer. We thank you both for that. We will now have our final question of the Crossfire Round, which Mr. Joe Hall, you can pose to Mr. Thaliwal.
Well, Mr. Dhaliwal, you've talked about all sorts of issues, whether it be about our democracy, whether it be about where I've needed to go for employment or to find a place to live. And I want to talk about what the constituents here in Surrey Newton are talking to me about every single day. When people fall ill, they should be able to access healthcare and medication with their health card and not with their credit card. Canada is the only wealthy country in the world with a universal healthcare system that does not include universal coverage for prescription medication. We pay the third highest prices for prescription medication anywhere in the world. This has all happened under Conservative governments and more recently under your government. Now, I was listening to the previous debate and I was very surprised at the representative from the Liberal Party talking about some recent report. It was in 1997 when the Liberal government at that time said, oh yeah, maybe we should have this thing where we can support people with their medications. And they had a report and they decided to do nothing about it. 24 years later, you're still talking about reports, haven't included it in your budget, and Canadians want to know, why did you vote against, on February 24th, 2021, Bill C-213, that was supposed to support people with access to medication. You voted against it, and your constituents and I want to know why.
First of all, Mr. Johal, I want to tell you, and I'm sure you will agree, that it was the Liberal government that brought in a universal healthcare system, and we are still proud of it, and we still want to keep that universal healthcare system alive, irrespective where people live, what their economic background is. Everyone should have an equal right to access the universal healthcare, and I'm sure you
so
will,
why
will
did
agree
you,
with
why
that.
did you vote against helping people with their prescription medication? Why did you vote against it?
Because the NDP, because they have never been in the government and they have no chance to form the government, and they can bring in any plan on the paper, but they would not be able to deliver how they can pay for it and how they can administer that.
If you look in the platform, if you look in the platform, it's very clear how we're going to do it.
And we will make sure that when it comes to pharmacare, we will bring it in a very constructive way that it helps families, and at the same time, we have resources to fund it.
I'm looking at my watch and it's telling me it's 1997 all over again. It's exactly what Liberals said in 1997. It's 24 years later. Hasn't happened. You're right, it is 2021.
Of a government, Mr.
I would be ashamed if I had these plans for 24 years and didn't bring them in. You can read our platform. It is out there. It explains how we are going to provide this system to Canadians. We are going to support you with the cost of your medication. We are going to negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical companies. They asked this government not to do that, and so they said yes. Of course, they're supporting the big pharma companies, and we are here to fight for people, and we're here to fight for you. This is something that we will do. It is in our platform. I'd tell you to have a look at the Liberal platform, but they don't have one.
We still have, I think, a few seconds.
It's not much more.
We're good. Okay,
Not much more
well,
I need to say after that.
All right, and that actually ends the crossfire section of today's debate. I'm loving the passion that's coming exuding. I know I personally, and the viewers know this, I was excited from the beginning, but now I'm getting more and more interested in what we're hearing. We're now going to move into the closing remarks section. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will have 1 minute to make your closing remarks for the evening.
First of all, I want to thank the Channel Punjabi, the panelist, and you being administering this one. And I want to appreciate Mr. Johal coming to this debate as well, because we see the Conservative missing. In fact, it's great to have a friendly dialogue, and I respect you, and I welcome you here as well. But when it comes to myself, I can tell you, I'm very clear. When it comes to Sook's record to help constituents, being the busiest office across Canada, I've been working hard for my constituent from day one, and I'm working with the same energy today, and I will continue to make sure, when it comes to policies, our government has delivered, whether it's childcare, whether it's the infrastructure, whether it's the funding for gang violence, to control those and make sure that our young people don't get involved in those activities, will always be there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Johal, you will now also have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the crew and the team here for hosting us. Thank you to Mr. Dhaliwal for joining in the debate, and our host as well. Very much appreciate it. I didn't get a chance to share this at the beginning, but I did want to acknowledge that our conversation today is taking place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Katzie, Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen peoples. And it's important that we think about our history as we think about our future. Now, I will share quickly, having the busiest office because people keep coming back for help over and over again is also not a good thing. Now, for parents who stay awake worrying about their children, for young people who are concerned about affordability and finding a good paying job, for seniors who are worried about the cost of their prescription medication, the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, and I will fight for you, we will fight for people, and we will fight for our families. Here in Surrey Newton, we're a community that cares about our families, we care about our faith, and we care about our futures together. We also have incredible stories of overcoming immense hardship. There's great determination, there's great grit, and there's great talent in this city and in this area of Surrey. I'm asking you to send me to Ottawa so I can share your stories, I can share our success, and I can make sure that our community gets the representation that it both needs and deserves.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johal. I want to thank both Mr. Sukh Dhaliwal and Mr. Avneet Johal for joining us tonight. I want to thank the Liberal Party and the NDP Party for joining this debate. As we said in the beginning, our channel did put out an invite to all candidates and to all parties to join us tonight. Accessibility is important in the electoral process. So the fact that you two gentlemen and both these parties have made themselves accessible to us, the voters, speaks volumes. So thank you very much to the both of you.
Thank you.
All right, we will be now moving on to the electoral district. We will now, welcome to live TV. We will now be moving on to the electoral district of Cloverdale Langley City. And joining us will be John Eldag and Rajesh Jayaprakash. Let's take a look back to 2019 federal election results in the electoral district of Cloverdale Langley City.
Cloverdale Langley City. Cloverdale Langley City will be one of the most watched seats in Aldog, 19,542 votes, and from the New Democratic Party, Rai Banwari got 10,508 votes, and from the People's Party of Canada, Lan Kennedy got 930 votes. And this year, that is 2021, the elected candidates are Tamara Jensen from the Conservative Party, John Aldog from the Liberal Party, Rajesh Jayaprakash from the NDP Party, and Lan Kennedy from People's Party of Canada.
To tonight's federal debate. We thank you both for being here, and we thank both the NDP and Liberal parties for joining us tonight. I want to just start off with some housekeeping, gentlemen, that in our first series you will be asked some panelist questions. They'll each be posed 3 questions to which you will get a 2-minute response time. When you hear a bell, that is your 30-second warning to wrap it up, because when you hear that buzzer, your mics are then silenced. So once you're posed a question, 2-minute response, and then your opponent will get a 1-minute response time in return to that. Again, the bell signals 30-second warning to wrap it up, and when you hear the buzzer, it's too late, your mic is silenced. All right? Okay, well, let's start here with the Cloverdale Langley City Electoral District. Our panelists will pose their first question to John Eldag.
Hi, John. Hi, Rajesh. First of all, I welcome you here, and thanks for joining us. The other candidate from Conservative Party, Tamara Jensen, was invited and she didn't show up. So my question to John is, there is a clear shortage of doctors in Canada. Parents are forced to send their children out of country for medical education and other education. What has the government done to open more facilities to educate people, students here?
Okay, great, thank you. I think that as we have come through this worldwide pandemic, the importance of accessible healthcare has become more and more important to our community. Speaking personally, my wife is a physician at Surrey Memorial Hospital, and so we've seen the very real impacts, the pressures that this has put on our community, on our healthcare providers, the doctors, the nurses, the health practitioners. And we are committed to working with the provinces to address this shortage of doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, and others. As part of our platform, we recently released a commitment to recruit more doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners. It's one way that how we can address the shortage of family doctors that we have, of having accessible health care made more readily available. We, as I say, with the pandemic, this has become really, really critical. We need to work with the provinces. The provinces are responsible primarily for healthcare, and so they're the ones that open up and run medical schools, but we have a role to play in supporting post-secondary education. A Liberal government, as I say, recognizes this. We also have worked on, through immigration, looking at attracting the trained professionals. And if we can find ways of attracting foreign-owned doctors, getting through the credential recognition piece, that's another really important way. We have the International Medical Graduate Program, and but I think ultimately we want to have doctors, not nurse practitioners and nurses who are trained locally, who are trained in Canada. And that's why a Liberal government has made this commitment to help expand the level of services that we have in Canada for healthcare. We need to prepare for if there's another pandemic, another episode such as this, so that we are not left with the kind of situation that we saw. And that's why we have made this commitment to improving, expanding healthcare in Canada.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eldag. Mr. Jayaprakash, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
Okay, thank you. First of all, let me say that I'm living and working from the unceded territories of Semiahmoo, Catchee, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, and Kokayet, the Wasan First Nations. It is clear that, let me say that I have two friends whose kids are from here. They're working, one is working in Britain, one is working in the US. These are doctors. I have another friend who is a wife, and she was a trained doctor back in India, and she cannot work here. It's clear that John doesn't even understand, the solutions of this problem. We have doctors, they are going outside the country and working. We have doctors who worked in other countries, they're just sitting at home because of the policies, and the liberal government does not understand this issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jayaprakash. Our panelists will now ask Mr. Jayaprakash his first question.
Hi, Jayaprakash. My question is about your riding. Your riding is growing at a very fast pace, and the Highway 10 is the only artery which is busy most of the time. What infrastructure would you propose?
Well, it would have been nice for the SkyTrain to connect that, but the most immediate thing that we need is connectivity, meaning more buses, right? Because that's what we can implement in more detail. I also started a transportation advocacy network 2 years back, which basically was proposing the high-speed rail connectivity from Seattle that can come into Surrey, but also I want that to be connected to the Cloverdale. But longer term, I think this is where the strategy comes into place. Longer term, we want to see a rapid transit network connecting all the lower mainland cities. I cannot understand why the Liberal government, the Conservative government doesn't even think about it. Like, we have Expo that brought the SkyTrain here, but who is taking the next big step? And we don't see that such things here. But the immediate priority, I will say, is buses.
Thank you, Mr. Jayaprakash. Mr. Eldag, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I would welcome the opportunity to talk about the infrastructure improvements that our government has made, particularly in the area of transit. As many Surrey residents and especially Langley City residents know, prior to the election call, our government committed $1.3 billion to complete the expansion of SkyTrain from King George Station down Fraser Highway right through to Langley City. We know that when the Surrey municipal elections happened, the change was made from light rail to SkyTrain. At that time, the claim was that SkyTrain could go all the way to Langley City for the existing funding allotment. We've since found out that there was a shortage of over $2.6 billion. The NDP government, provincially, who we have a really good relationship with, and our federal government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, have committed that remaining $2.6 billion. And that means there's going to be 20 more kilometers of SkyTrain in our community to serve the growing needs of Cloverdale, Langley City. It's going to be absolutely transformational along the highway.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eldag. Again, when you hear that 30-second bell, you want to just speed it up and, like I said before, get the train to the station. All right, so we will have our second question from our panelists to Mr. Eldag.
Mr. John, like the heartbreaking news of the Indian residential school genocide is a talk in the city, right? So this also once again reminded us of the gravity of the issue. Aboriginal leaders have stated that no action has been taken to their satisfaction. What has your party done, and what would you do regarding this issue so that the people can have some more answers?
Well, thank you for raising this most important issue. Canada has a long and difficult relationship with our Indigenous peoples, And we know that the tragedy that unfolded over the last few months as we found the missing children has really brought light to this. We know that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had actually tabled calls to action in 2015, and part of it was a report on the missing children. Of those actions, there were, I think, over 94 actions. Not all of them apply to federal jurisdiction, but of the ones that do, over 80% of them have either been started or been completed. When I was the Member of Parliament, I actually had a private member's bill that passed the House of Commons unanimously, and it was implementing one of the actions, the calls to action. Unfortunately, the Conservative Party in the Senate killed my private member's bill, and we were not able to see it through to the finish. I also know in my career with the National Park Service, with Parks Canada, prior to entering politics, I had lived in many areas in the country, and I have spent time around tables with Indigenous families who had children, aunts and uncles, and others from their families taken away and never came home. And so the Indigenous peoples have known for generations that this has happened, that this tragedy has been there. And so I'm absolutely, I think it's appropriate that Canadians are realizing that this has happened and encouraging the government to continue to take action. We are working on with First Nations communities to make sure that we respectfully determine how to proceed with the missing children who have been found and those that are yet to be discovered. I don't think the government can unilaterally go in and find any solutions. We need to work respectfully with the communities, with the relatives, with the descendants and survivors to come to a very appropriate solution, a sensitive solution, and a consultative and inclusive solution.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Aldag. Mr. Jayaprakash, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, I'm happy that the Liberals are finally admitting the relationship have been long and difficult. That's a good start. But when the tragedy unfolded, we saw that Indigenous leaders were asking for church records, and it was not available. It was not provided. The Liberal government did not take any steps to provide even those records. And Jagmeet Singh, the leader of NDP, is the one who clearly stated they will take steps to make those records available so that we can find more children if they have been missing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jayaprakash. The panelists will now ask Mr. Jayaprakash his second question of the evening.
Hi Rajesh, your leader Jagmeet Singh is promising $10 billion universal pharmacare plan, and with increasing deficit and growing debts, how you guys think that you're going to collect that much money to fund this expensive program?
I believe you are talking, I didn't hear the question.
So it's about the universal pharmacare program, 10 billion program, and how you guys have a policy to utilize this funding for this program.
Okay, thank you. I just couldn't hear. Okay, this is a very often repeated statements from the Liberals as well as Conservative, and more like a fear factor. Okay, there is no money. But think about it. We are introducing a wealth tax which could bring almost $70 billion, and there is a corporate tax loopholes that we want to close, which is expected to bring tens and tens of billions of dollars. So there is always money. The question is, who is paying for this thing, right? So the Liberals and Conservatives always want to give the money to the super rich as well as the corporations. You might have heard that, but when you look at these things in detail, when you look at these numbers in detail, you will see that there is money. It's just that who is paying for it. And the NDP and the Jagmeet Singh will ensure the ultra-rich, I will say the billionaires and the corporates are paying their fair share. And the way we are doing it is, by the wealth tax and a few other programs, which is already published in our platform.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Aldag, you now have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I think that the issue of ongoing accessible medical systems, including pharmacare, are very important. What I find is very concerning in this country is that the Conservative Party, who, as has been pointed out, chose not to participate this evening, has said that they will not support the continuation of an exclusively private or public-funded system, that they would introduce an element of private. And I think that Canadians should be very concerned about that. I think that our government has made efforts on looking at how national pharmacare could be implemented in Canada, while recognizing that a lot of this requires provincial input. It is like so many issues in this federation that we have in Canada, where there's federal responsibilities, there are provincial responsibilities. It means all levels of government coming together and figuring out how we could fund something like pharmacare. I know that if we can actually negotiate things nationally, that could help save some costs. But ultimately, it is interesting to hear that the NDP really don't have a plan on how they can fund this this program that they are now implementing.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Eldag. Our panelists will now ask Mr. Eldag his last and final question of the evening.
Mr. Eldag, my question is about the call for this election. Why was an election called in the pandemic, and when both opposite parties, they are cooperative and they are saying this is unnecessary?
Right. So I've had this question come up on the doorstep somewhat. And what my experience is, having been in the campaign in 2019, is that we did not talk about the issues of the pandemic in the 2019 election. We have had a global event that has caused economic and health devastation with losses of lives in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands internationally, and we're not through it yet. So when we look at the programs the government has implemented, we acted quickly. We rolled out programs like CERB and rent subsidies and other programs for businesses. This is not something, though, that we campaigned on in 2019. We also feel that as we are hopefully getting near the end of this pandemic, we need to have Canadians decide what they want the new normal to look like. Where should we be spending our money? Where should we be focusing our efforts? The Conservatives do not even agree that climate change is real. Our party does, and we have a plan to get to net zero by 2050. But that's going to take time and effort. It's going to take change in society. And so we feel that the time is right now. There's been somewhat of a break in Canada because of the high levels of vaccination that our government has delivered. We're now over 80% vaccinated in Canada generally, with the highest level in the world as far as dealing with the pandemic. And so this is a good time for Canadians to enter into a conversation, to hear from other parties, including the NDP, the Conservatives, and others, on what their vision is to move forward. We feel that we have the most appropriate plan, the most realistic plan, the most implementable plan to get us out of the pandemic and into the kind of society we want to move into. And that's why we're on the doorsteps right now, talking to Canadians, listening to them in a meaningful way, and making sure that our commitments reflect their needs. And that's why we have the election underway at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Eldag. Mr. Jayaprakash, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
Yes, Johnson said NDP does not have a plan. We have the plan published. You can see it on our website to begin with. And I gave the numbers when I answered the question. Now, let me ask John, they have a plan. Where is the plan? They called this election. They don't even have the plan on their website yet. I think you can see this contradiction right there. And now, calling this election at this time, they have 2 years to go, and we have wildfires here. We have a pandemic here. They thought, okay, this is the best time to grab the power, and that explains everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Jayaprakash. Our panelists will now ask Mr. Jayaprakash his last and final question from the panel this evening.
So Rajesh, like the climate change is a huge issue, right, for the whole of the world. Now the NDP is proposing an aggressive greenhouse emissions policy. In the past, we have seen that when we need to offset these costs, we have to raise the taxes. How your party will handle these things? Either you're going to raise the taxes, or how you can handle the situation?
Well, first of all, let's understand, I will answer the question, but before that, let's understand the gravity of the issue of climate change or climate crisis. We are at a point in time as humanity, in which we inherited, like our generation inherited a beautiful planet. Do you think our kids are inheriting that beautiful planet, or are they inheriting a scary planet with wildfires, floods and droughts? Is our generation's legacy is that we robbed that beautiful planet from our kids, our grandkids? So we have to appreciate the grandiose of this climate crisis to begin with. I think that is the most pressing problem that we are facing. Now, we have to address that. Are we talking about, okay, let's pump a ton of money on it, and is that how we address it? No. The Liberals have promised, okay, let's plant 2 billion trees. How many have they planted? 0. Right? Now they want more time. Oh, 2050 we will be like net zero. Let's wait till 2050. Do you think the wildfires will wait till 2050? So we have to honor that. We have a Green New Deal proposed, and we are the party you can trust. You can trust the leader Jagmeet Singh, and you can trust the NDP party to implement those programs and face this climate crisis. We will take a leadership role in this world to implement that.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Jayaprakash. Mr. Aldag, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I think that the NDP candidate has played a bit loose with the facts there. Our government actually has a plan, and it's well known. It's been published. It's a plan to get to net zero by 2050 with aggressive targets to get there, with legislated targets that have to be reported every 5 years. I would like to point out that my background was within the environmental field with the National Park Service. And when I was in Parliament, I was on the Sustainable and Environment and Sustainable Development Committee. I chaired it for the final year of my term. And in that, we made a number of recommendations to the government on how we could move even faster and more aggressively to get to net zero. The government implemented many of those recommendations in its plan to move forward. And so I've had a very direct hand in playing in Canada's climate plan. Our government has listened, they've responded, it's underway, we are implementing it. It goes way beyond 2 billion trees. It is multifaceted, it goes across sectors, and it will get us to where we need to be to ensure the planet's survival.
Okay, right on the buzzer. Thank you, Mr. Aldag. We have now completed the panelist question portion of this debate with Mr. Aldag and Mr. Jayaprakash. We're going to move on to the crossfire round. In this crossfire round, gentlemen, we will begin with Mr. Aldag. You'll be able to pose a question to your opponent, in which there'll be a 2-minute open debate. We'll start with Mr. Aldag. So Mr. Aldag, you can go ahead and pose your first question to Mr. Jayaprakash, upon which there will be, again, 2-minute open debate.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to pose this question. Since I started in federal politics in about 2014, I have been out knocking on doors and talking to our constituents. Leading up to the 2015 campaign, I had knocked on over 35,000 doors. In the 2019 campaign, we continued to build and got up to over 60,000 doors that we had talked to over time. And in this campaign, we are really, really moving through and having meaningful conversations with our constituents and residents. I'd like to know from my NDP opponent how many doors he has knocked, the things that he is hearing on the doorsteps, and how that fits in with the NDP plan, because I know that the things that I'm hearing in the door, the Liberals have are including in our plan to move forward, and it makes for very exciting conversations on the doorsteps. So how many doors have you been knocking, and what lessons or what messages are you hearing?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I don't understand how the number of doors knocked is a measure of somebody's quality or somebody's ability to perform, right? I don't think that is measured. Now, I was a regular employee when I was entered into politics because of the SkyTrain, and I want to talk about that. But now I am a small business owner. I have a business to run. I am like a regular person who is seeing that this politician, the full-time politician who have a lot of time and resources on their hands, are failing us. Even during a climate crisis and these housing crises, these kind of times, the politicians are facing us. So I am stepping in. I might not have knocked as many doors as you, but from the very beginning, I worked with a lot of people here. I was a director of many associations here. I worked with a lot of healthcare workers. I single-handedly, when no politicians was able to stand up for the SkyTrain, and everybody said it is LRT, I was the one who stood up and made it a political issue. I protested in front of the TransLink demonstrations, and that brought that issue. I even formed a party when I was working as a full-time employee. I formed a party, I ran for mayor, I gathered up 6 people to run for councillors, and we had open houses full of people, right? So I brought those issues to the attention. I turned the direction of the debate itself. Thank you. Thank you for giving me that opportunity to express that.
Okay. There's still a little bit of time, I think, before our buzzer.
Okay.
20 seconds. So remember, this is open debate. So if he's talking, you can talk too.
Okay,
if you have
well,
something to say, we can hash it out. This is a debate for you.
I would like to say that, I would like to say what you have to say. Your party has been in power all this time, and all this climate crisis is still unfolding. What exactly have you guys done?
Yeah, and I would like to say that, to your point, small business is the heart of our community, and I commend you for being in small business. I would say that to me, it's not about necessarily that knocking doors is the only thing, but to me, it's a very important way to have conversations with my community.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we end up with Ottawa becoming the voice in our community as opposed to our voices
we are
going
doing it
to
in a
Ottawa.
much. I am doing
that
it.
is why, to me, having those conversations on the doorsteps is so important. I know the types of messages that I'm hearing from my constituents, and that gives me the ideas and the mandate to fight for things.
Yeah, I am doing it in a more technological way.
Mr.
It's
Jayaprakash,
online.
so now the time is up. The buzzer has sounded. I do want to remind you, this is an open debate. So you necessarily, not that I want to add fuel to the fire, or the passion here, but if he's talking, you have something to say, it's an open debate. But you have 2 minutes. So when you hear that bell, that's your, you want to get something in, that's the time. So this is a little bit different than the panelist question portion of the evening, all right? Okay, so Mr. Jayaprakash, you will now have the opportunity to pose a question to Mr. Aldag, to which there will be a 2-minute time frame for an open debate.
All right. Thank you. John, with all the respect, my question to you is about the Loblaws. I believe you will remember the Loblaws is a company that posted $221 million quarterly profit, and they're also the company who was in a 16 years price fixing deal to increase the price of bread. And this is something, how grocery prices are now. And this is such a company. This is a company that voted against giving minimum wage to their workers. But now, as a solution to climate change, Justin Trudeau and your government gave $12 million to Loblaws to replace their refrigeration, right? Why would you give taxpayers' dollars to such a company, such a profitable company, a company would has such a bad reputation, the money allocated for climate change, for these kind of things?
Well, thank you for continuing to raise attention to the issue of climate change and the climate crises that we're in. I would say that the challenge that we have is that we cannot pick winners and losers when we get into the debate on climate change and the fight against climate change. We have to go for everybody and make the inroads where we can. Loblaws, we know, as a large corporation, has a huge environmental footprint. And so it's about where can government assist any business
they have
actually
billions
reduce
in
their
profits.
emission targets.
Why can't they use that profit? Why do they have to use taxpayers' dollars?
And what you're doing is you're picking your winners and losers as opposed to keeping the eye on the goal.
I think the only
and that's
losers
actually
here
to
are the
reduce
people.
greenhouse
They
emissions.
are the ones losing their money to this big corporation.
Well, and we believe that we need to work across sectors. We need to work in the oil and gas sector, which also has a lot of money behind it, but they are huge emitters. The transportation sector has contributes.
So the government basically has no
everybody.
leverage in talking to them. There is no way you have to do something about climate change, then use your profit. No, you cannot do that. You have to. We have to pay them.
The issue is that the NDP wants to go after businesses and try to make them pay their bill. They'll take away the competitiveness of our businesses. Our Liberal government is very much about working with everybody, from big businesses, from small businesses, from individuals, to address something that is as you said in your comments, probably the biggest crises that our civilization has seen.
I am myself a small business owner. I'm a technology business owner. I don't feel NDP is against me. NDP is fighting for me, for all of us.
Well, and I would say that a Liberal government, with our platform, with our commitments we've made, the achievements that we have delivered over the past 6 years, really speaks to that we have a plan and we are implementing it. We are making a change. We've invested more than $100 billion in climate change. That is more than any government.
Why couldn't you put a plan on your website? So far, even after NDP election, why
there
couldn't
it
you put the
is.
plan?
So we were looking. Maybe next time I'm going to have the buzzer up here, so I just kind of light up when time is up. But all right. Well, thank you so much for that, Mr. Aldag. You now can pose your final question, which will be open to a 2-minute debate with Mr. Jayaprakash.
Sure. Well, as We've heard in the media posing the question to the NDP leader. The question has come up about if the Conservatives were to get any sort of edge on this campaign, would they prop them up? We know that in the past the NDP have collaborated with the Conservatives, and we've seen things like the end of the Kyoto Accord in 2005 when the NDP voted with the Conservatives to bring down the Paul Martin government. We saw $10 a day childcare died as a result of that. We saw other agreements that were so important to our country. And it was through that collaboration of the Conservatives with the NDP supporting that we're now waiting almost 20 years for these things. And so the question I have is, where is your leader standing on who he will support as we come out of this, and assuming that, or hoping that a Liberal government is formed, will the NDP work with us to advance an aggressive legislative agenda to deal with the needs that Canadians have as we come out of this pandemic and work towards building a new normal?
Yeah, it's absolutely good to have. I think everybody need to have hope. You guys can hope that you are going to form the government. That's your hope. It's not everybody's hope. I think the people have seen enough. People of this country have seen that you're calling a snap election in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of wildfires. I think this time they can see through the smoke.
Well, I would say that on the conversations that I'm having on the doorsteps, there is an excitement for the work that our government has been doing. There's a level of support, unlike I've seen in the last couple of years, because people are feeling
that's
optimistic
your reality.
again. They feel
that.
very much that the government backed them during COVID, that we had all of these programs that help businesses and individuals survive. And I think that there is an excitement for a Liberal government
so let's go back to the issue you raised, the pharmacare, especially the overall health care. This is something NDP has been championing for decades. And even after all these decades of liberal rules, conservative rules, we are still talking about, let's do it. Let's put some more money.
The thing is, the NDP has good policy discussions, but they will not form government. They will not be able to implement.
We are the only one who does not have a full healthcare coverage here in this country, right? You are still doing it after even these decades.
Well,
so this maybe the people can see that this is the chance to give it to try a new person.
We've already spoken that earlier this evening that our government has committed to healthcare improvements, significant healthcare improvements, and in fact
right?
that will continue to make a difference in the healthcare that Canadians have, and it's working across a number of issues that Canadians are facing by having conversations on the streets that our government understands what the needs of our citizens are, of our residents are, and that's how we can fight for them.
Yeah, but you are going and having the conversation, but we are a party of the people fighting for those people, and each one we are fighting for each one of the citizens of this country.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jayaprakash. And now, Mr. Jayaprakash, you will have the opportunity to ask your last and final question to Mr. Aldag.
All right. Okay. My question is about the audits being done by CRA. Since Justin Trudeau has taken power, the number of audits done by CRA for the large corporation has gone down by 30%. And if I give you some more statistics, the amount of money they are collecting has gone down, and also the number of cases in which they are able to retrieve that money has gone down from around 5,000 to 2,000. So my question now is, why is the Liberals giving a free ride for this corporation? Why are you constraining CRA from doing this audit in the way they used to do? This is the money that we need for a lot of services, healthcare, and many other public services.
Well, I think that in your question, the premise is that the NDP doesn't support big business, and that they're going to tax the profitability out of businesses. And what we want to see
tax evasion that we are talking about.
We want to see very much that the businesses pay their fair share, that they contribute to society, that they pay their taxes, and we do have audits that do happen, and we make sure that Canadians are paying their taxes. But right now, where we have focused in the last year,
but you still have not answered the question. You still have not answered the numbers.
Right. Well,
and you're an MP, right?
No,
you have been an MP.
Well, but I haven't been for 2 years, and so I can't speak to the exactly what's been going on right now.
I'm a common guy and never been an MP. I can talk about the numbers.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm saying is that our government has been very focused on the pandemic and on helping businesses survive. I've been out in the community talking to so many businesses to say that they would have had to lock up shop and lay off all of their employees if it wasn't there for the programs that our government had provided them. As a result of that, as we come out of the pandemic, they are hiring their employees back, they retain them, they don't have to do the retraining. Our economy is recovering the jobs that we lost, and there will be greater economic wealth as we come through this. The companies are going to be prospering, and that's because our government was there for them during a very, very tough time.
Business owner doing those things, right? We know, I'm in the network, we know what's happening. You're just going and talking to them and then relaying that information. That's all right.
Well, like I say, our government will continue to work with businesses, big and small, to make sure that...
But you still don't have an answer on why the CRA is being constrained and why these big corporations are being let loose or with their tax evasion. You don't have an answer, I suppose.
The CRA has its mandate. It operates without political interference from the elected officials, and they set their priorities on where they're going to be conducting their business. I think it's very dangerous if elected officials start telling them how to do their business and what business or individual to single out.
Right, thank you so much, gentlemen. That concludes the Crossfire portion of our debate tonight. We will now move on to the closing remarks. We'll start with you, Mr. Eldag. You'll have 1 minute for your closing remarks this evening.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to Channel Punjabi for having us here and our panelists to be in the excellent moderation. It was a pleasure and an honor for me to be the Member of Parliament for Cloverdale Langley City from 2015 to 2019. I think that as we saw in the opening numbers when he presented the results, this has always been a Conservative riding. I was able to win it from them from 2015 to 2019. The issue that we're having is that the Conservative Member of Parliament, representative, the candidate who is running now, who has not shown up for this debate, has continued to focus on a very singular topic, and that's her social conservative agenda. She has not been at all inclusive. She has not reflected the needs and diversity of this community, the beauty of it. She has gone after medical assistance in dying in Delta. She has gone after trying to end a woman's right to choose. She has really, she's a climate change denier. We've talked about the importance of climate change tonight. If the residents of Cloverdale Langley City continue to support the Conservative member, we will not see any progress in this community. It's time to vote Liberal. I ask your viewers to vote John Aldag and to help us get Cloverdale Langley City back on track.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eldag. We will now have closing remarks for Mr. Jayaprakash. You'll have 1 minute.
All right. I want to retouch the economic aspect of these things. This is a scare tactics always used by the Liberals and the Conservative, that if MDP is elected, the whole hell will break loose. There is not economy is going to tank. But no, please have a look at the platform we are proposing. We have proposing a wealth tax of $70 billion and closing these loopholes. Economy will not tank with NDP. This is a foe. This is a smoke screen that is being built. Now we have a leader, Jagmeet Singh. He is fighting for you. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jayaprakash. I want to thank both, not just the NDP and Liberal parties, but Mr. John Eldag and Mr. Jayaprakash for being here tonight and taking out the time to be accountable and to be accessible to the voters. Again, I want to remind our viewers that Channel Punjabi did put out an invite to all candidates and to all parties. So thank you so much for taking out your time for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right, we're going to move on now. We're not going to move on to, again, welcome to live TV.
Oh, is it?
Oh, it is. This is the live TV, and we're all excited up here. We're going to move on now to our final riding of the evening. We have here tonight with us candidates from the Surrey Fleetwood riding. We have joining us tonight Ken Hardy as well as Raji Tour. Let's take a look back at the 2019 federal election results for the Surrey Fleetwood electoral district.
Surrey Fleetwood. Fleetwood is one of about half a dozen Metro Vancouver ridings the Liberals and Conservatives will be battling over. The total population of this constituency is 116,958, out of which South Asian comprise of about 30.1%, multiple minorities 1.6%, visible minorities 0.3%. Ken Hardy was re-elected in 2019, edging the Conservatives' Shinder Purival by 1,883 votes, a margin of 3.9%. The NDP's Annie Ohana finished third. Ken Hardy got a total of 18,545 votes. Shinder Purival from Conservative Party got 16,646 votes. Annie Ohana, who from New Democratic Party, got 10,569 votes. Tanya Berti from Green Party got 2,378 votes. Mike Pauline from People's Party got 1,104 votes. And this year, that is 2021, the elected candidates are Ken Hardy from Liberal Party, Dave Heyer from Conservative Party, Rajpreet Toor from NDP Party, Perry Deneur from Green Party, Amrit Biring from People's Party of Canada.
From the Surrey Fleetwood Electoral District with us here tonight. We thank both of you for taking out the time and answering some questions and some concerns from our voters. Now, before we begin, we just want to remind you that we are going to be starting off with the panelist questions. Each of you will be asked a series of 3 questions to which you will have a 2-minute response time. Upon that, your opponent will get 1 minute to respond in return. So we are going to begin the evening. I also want to remind you, this has been a point of some contention tonight. You will get 2 minutes. We're strict with the time, as well as respectable with each other. When you hear the bell, that is your 30-second warning to start wrapping it up. And once you hear the buzzer, your mic has then been silenced. So we will start with our first question for Mr. Ken Hardy from the panel.
Hi Ken, hi Raji. First of all, I welcome you and thank you for joining us. The other contender, Conservative Party candidate Mr. Dave here, was invited as well, but he's not joining us. He didn't show up. So my question to Ken is, COVID-19 has devastated Canadians. We all suffered during it. No company in Canada had the capacity to produce own vaccine, and we relied on other nations. And what steps were taken while you were in government, and what's your party proposing so we don't face the challenge again?
What happened was, I think, an honest error by the previous Conservative government. They felt that globalism would always look after us, that whatever we wanted, we can go out in the world market and buy it. And that proved not to be the case. When the outbreak happened, I think a lot of countries started to hoard their personal protective equipment and their vaccines to look after their own people. So the system broke down. During the Conservative time, during Mr. Harper's time, we had 7 vaccine manufacturers leave Canada. And during Brian Mulroney's time, he privatized one of the world's best vaccine manufacturers, the Connaught Labs. So I think everybody thought, well, that's fine, you know, as I say, globalization will look after us. It didn't. So what we did is we went out and we looked at all of the leading and promising vaccines, and we signed contracts with all of them. We signed contracts for a lot more vaccines than we needed, knowing that some maybe wouldn't come through, and so we hedged our bets. And at the end of it all, we ended up months ahead of our own projections in terms of making sure that Canadians had vaccines if they wanted them. And, you know, so far we've delivered, goodness gracious, over 63 million vaccines to the provinces and territories. So we now have a tentative deal with Moderna to build a new vaccine facility. We have a new one in Montreal coming up, and other smaller ones in a couple of other places. As well, we've mobilized industry, General Motors, a hockey manufacturer, to produce the gloves, the gowns, the shields, the things that we will need, and the things that we will stockpile off in the future, so that our health sovereignty, if you want to call it that, won't be challenged again like it was during the pandemic.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Hardy. Raji Toor, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
With the COVID vaccines, I do feel that the Liberal government should have been a lot faster with the rollout. I personally have heard stories where people have passed away because of COVID, and they could have been protected if these vaccines were rolled out a lot faster.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Tour. Our panelists will now ask Ms. Raji Tour her first question of the evening.
Hi, Rajitur. Earlier this year, NDP member parliament from Nunavut, Mamila Kakar, she decided not to seek re-election due to racism, isolation and harassment at the parliament. So being you as a woman of minority, how will you tackle these issues in the parliament if elected?
These are issues that are affecting our society and especially the community of Fleetwood Fork Health. As a woman of color, this is something that is really close to my heart. Myself, I have faced racism in different areas, and as a government, we need to be educating the community, and we also need to be educating our children to understand different cultures and respect everybody, and everyone needs to be included.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Tour. Mr. Hardy, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
It was heartbreaking to hear that member's comments when she gave her final speech in the House of Commons, because it is the House of Commons. It's the place where all Canadians should feel welcome. And, you know, whether or not it was her perception or sensitivities, we did not accommodate her appropriately. And I have to say I lay part of that right at the feet of the Conservative Party of Canada, because if you look at the behavior in the House of Commons, if you look at the heckling, if you look at the toxic environment, they are the people who are primarily responsible for it. And it isn't just us feeling that. They've been called out by Elizabeth May, they've been called out by the NDP and by the Bloc, in fact, for really the terrible way they behave to a lot of people in that House of Commons.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Hardy. Our panelists will now ask Mr. Hardy his second question of the evening.
Yeah, Mr. Khan, during the Liberal government, we saw numerous cases of sexual harassment. So what steps have been taken, and what will your party do to eradicate this type of behavior towards the woman?
I would presume you were speaking of what was going on in the military?
Yeah.
Well, obviously we're dealing with something that isn't brand new. You know, we're dealing, in fact, the historical cases coming forward indicated that there have been problems in that area for quite some time. And they've been allowed to become very deeply rooted, and I don't put the blame on any particular government for it happening, but I think we all share responsibility for ending it. And our government and Harjit Sajjan, our defense minister, has made this an absolute priority. There's a lot of work to do, because the old boys club in the military or the police or in ambulance services and others, it exists, and it's very toxic toward women. And it's got to stop, and our party's working toward that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hardy. Ms. Tour, you will now have 1 minute to respond.
With these cases of any type of harassment, especially when it comes to sexual harassment, we need to really put a stop to this. There needs to be better law enforcement when it comes to things like this. People need to, really educate themselves, and like I said, we need to put a stop to this.
Okay, thank you so much. Our panelists will now pose their second question to Ms. Tour.
Hi Raji, many Canadian families living abroad that could not be united with loved ones due to changes in family reunification policies. For example, family immigration cases. This is a joke, it's taking years. And what will be your options on this, and what will your party do if elected?
I'm really glad that you asked this question. I've worked on a lot of immigration cases. I worked for an MP for many years, and it's just heartbreaking seeing that these families are separated for so many years. This is something that our government will be focusing on. We will be reuniting families. This will be the first point of immigration for us. And being an immigrant myself to this country, it was very, very difficult to even sponsor my own parents. It took a long time for them to come here, and being separated was extremely, extremely hard. And this isn't just my case, I've had this with a lot of other people too.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Tour. Mr. Hardy, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I don't disagree with Ms. Tour on this one. I believe that the policies and procedures by Immigration Canada could serve with a good shakeout, and I'll be very, very clear about that. Now, what we have done is, first, we've recognized that families do deserve to be together. So, whereas the Conservatives, I think, had a limit of 5,000 parent and grandparent applications that they would accept in 1 year, we're accepting 50,000, so 10 times that amount, because we want families to be together. Secondly, our party recognizes, and especially where the Conservatives do not, the value of immigration generally. Our economy needs more people if we're to sustain our social programs and build the country. So whereas most Conservatives want to cut immigration, we want to see it boosted, and not just the big, best and brightest, but people really willing to work hard and build a good life for themselves.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Hardy. We will now have the panelists ask their final question to Mr. Hardy of the evening.
International students, they are an important part of the Canada. They are paying fees 3 times than the Canadian student, and they are being harassed at the workplaces. What Liberal Party is going to do for this?
I think we really need to step back and have a good look at that. It is troubling to me that our education system needs that influx of cash in order to provide services generally across the board. And I think that international students, they bring a richness, first of all, to the school life, but they also, obviously, when they graduate, become the source of highly skilled, highly motivated people who want to work in our economy. So I think we really need to reform that. That's something that I've watched. I wish I could have done a deeper dive into it, to be honest with you, because I'm not satisfied with the way it's working to be.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Hardy. Ms. Stewart, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
International students are coming to our country, and they are enriching us, like Mr. Ken Hardy has said. We do need to put more focus on them. Like, if we have invited them here to the country to make a better life for themselves, as the government, we need to be assisting them with programs. They shouldn't have to be being put in debt or finding life like a struggle. I've spoken to many students who they have to share accommodation with many others. They're struggling to pay their rent. They're struggling to pay the tuition. This is where the government really needs to focus on this.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Tour. Panelists will now ask Ms. Tour her final question for the evening.
Yeah, Raji, like the crime and the gang violence is a huge topic in the Surrey area. So we see like a number of incidents happening. Do you have anything specific, concrete plan in your platform that how you can going to fix this issue?
We are going to be putting money into programs to educate people with gang violence. We are also stopping any handheld guns coming into the country. And we're going to be funding, as an educator myself, I'm a school teacher, we will be implementing programs to help with this. So we need to get to the root of the problem. Instead of just trying to catch the criminals, we need to see what's going on with that.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Tour. Mr. Hardy, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
The gang and gun violence that we see in our community is driven by the drug trade. And we've been trying to arrest our way out of this problem for as long as I've been around, which has been a long time. We need to have a very brave and alternate look at this. We need to look at Portugal, for instance, which treats drugs as a health issue, not as a crime issue. We'll lose 50 people a month to fentanyl overdoses. They'll lose less than a dozen people in Portugal for a whole year to an overdose. So rather than trying to police our way out of this problem, we need much, much braver conversations and different ways of dealing with this in order that we actually crowd the gangs out of the drug trade, out of the big money. What's left for them?
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Hardy. That concludes our panelist question portion for this portion of the debate. We will now move on to the Crossfire Round. In this round, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask their opponent 2 questions. You will pose your question, to which there will be an open 2-minute debate. So you don't have to be polite. You just have to wait for that bell and then that buzzer. So this is your opportunity. The voters want to hear. They want to have their questions addressed, their concerns addressed. So we'll start with Mr. Hardy. You have the opportunity to pose a question to Ms. Tour, upon which there will be a open 2-minute debate opportunity.
The provincial NDP has never had a better partner than the Federal Liberal Party when it comes to funding for programs, when it comes to innovating and really doing an awful lot to boost quality of life here in British Columbia. If we propose for a minute that the NDP were to form government or to prop up the Conservative Party, what would you think would be the prospects for that kind of relationship going forward?
Mr. Hardy, we are here to form government, and we have a different view when we do form government. We're the Workers' Party, so we will be there for the people. We are there to support the people and do whatever we can for all Canadians, not just a certain percentage of Canadians.
With respect, you do not have the national traction to form a government. And your leader has said that he has no problem in supporting the Conservative. This is back to the future, by the way, because this is exactly what happened in 2006 when Jack Layton and Stephen Harper brought down Paul Martin's government. And we ended up with 10 years of Conservatives. So, again, given that the best that can happen for you is some sort of coalition with the Conservatives, how do you think that's going to play out in BC?
Mr. Hardy, I will have to look into that and I will get back to you.
Okay. We don't have to wait for the bell or the buzzer. If you have something in addition to say, Mr. Hardy, you are able to. We still have some time left in our 2-minute round. We have 1 minute left. So if anybody has anything they'd like to say at this matter, please.
Well, actually, I have something to say. And it does go to the person who's not here. The guy that should be over here right now, which is Dave Hare. Okay? Listen, I want to make something perfectly clear to Mr. Hare right now, that I have been proud to call Surrey my home for 21 years. I say that strongly for the benefit of my friend David Hare, who's claimed that I don't live in the riding. Well, this is my home, period. Continued claims that I live somewhere else, Dave, is going to further hurt your image as a person of integrity. Not showing up to here tonight also damages that. And I want that noted. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Hardy. Ms. Tour, you will now have the opportunity to pose a question to Mr. Hardy. Upon there will be an opportunity for a 2-minute debate. I highly encourage both candidates to grasp that opportunity, because voters have questions, we have concerns, and we want them addressed. So please, go ahead, Ms. Tour.
Mr. Hardy, I would like to ask why your party voted against pharmacare.
We didn't vote against pharmacare. We voted against the version of it that the NDP was bringing forward. The NDP
Can you please tell me what your version is?
Has had actually a really good track record of coming up with things that are very aspirational, look very good, but when you lift the lid on it, you find they won't work. The problem with the NDP approach that they brought forward in the House of Commons is that it totally ignored the obligation to deal with the provinces. You can't impose something like that because constitutionally, healthcare is a provincial responsibility. So you have to negotiate with the provinces, and the NDP had showed no signs of even thinking about that, much less having the ability to do it.
Can you please tell me what is in your platform when it's regarding to any sort of medicine for the Canadians?
Yes. We are continuing work with pharmacare. In fact, there's a pilot program underway right now in Prince Edward Island that the Conservatives said that they would put an end to. As well, we've put money into a special account for people with very rare diseases where a dose can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've also gone forward with something called Trikafta, pardon me. It's a special new therapy for people with cystic fibrosis. And so, piece by piece and issue by issue, we've come to the table with money, of course, that's the active ingredient, but also with innovation and coaxing out the things that will really make a difference for people.
Can you please tell me what the time frame would be with that?
Yes, the time frame is, well, for some of these it's within a few months, to be honest with you. The work on pharmacare is going to take a little longer because it is tough sledding with our provincial partners. But we have been working on what we call a formulary, that is, the drugs that are going to be covered by pharmacare. And we have, those negotiations going forward, which inevitably will come down to money and healthcare transfers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hardy and Ms. Tour. We will now move on to Mr. Hardy. You may pose your final question to Ms. Tour, followed by a 2-minute debate, which the two of you did excellent on just previous, because we want to hear, we want to know. So, Mr. Hardy, please go ahead.
I asked you to speculate on what the partnership with BC would be like if the NDP were to form government. What are your fears if the Conservatives do?
Mr. Hardy, we are here to form a government without the Conservatives. We are here to form a government that will help the people of Canada, all the Canadians, not just a small percentage. And we will work for everyone. We are the Workers' Party.
Well, I would question that. Certainly, you have not been the Workers' Party when it comes to the transition in the oil patch. Your opposition to the petrochemical industry has been very damaging, and your colleagues on the provincial level in Alberta have had a devil of a time trying to square the relationship with the National Party. But the fact is, and it is regrettable that one of two parties will form the next government. It'll be Liberal, or it'll be Conservative. So which one do you want to work with more?
Mr. Hardy, that is a question that we will tell you about at another time. I will get back to you.
Well, I think that, and it pains me to say this, because when you look riding by riding, and you look at the fact that there's a progressive vote in Canada, right? These are people who believe in social justice and equity versus equality, which is the big thing with the Conservatives. And there are actually 3 or 4 parties.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hardy and Ms. Tour. Ms. Tour, you now have the opportunity to ask and pose your last final question to Mr. Hardy.
Mr. Hardy, can you please tell me what is your affordability platform when it comes to housing?
There's actually 2 aspects to this. One is to obviously increase supply, which everybody says you have to do, and that involves building more housing. So we have the Rapid Housing Initiative that will put hundreds of units in place here in Surrey before the end of the year.
But how much will those units be? Because under the Liberal government, the housing prices have increased, and people have been... They can't even buy a house now. It's a faraway dream for them.
And that's the reason for that, of course, is that the government hasn't taken a hand in dealing with the prices of housing. That's the other piece. So we'll build more houses, right? Immediately and in the long run. But dealing with all of those forces that cause housing prices to go up, the speculators, people are speculating. They're treating a house as an investment as opposed to a place where people live. And so where that speculation is damaging the housing market, we will step in and we will do something about that. We'll deal with the foreign money that's been coming in and bidding up the price. I'm sorry?
Can you please let me know what's been going on with the housing prices, though, under the Liberal government?
Well, the housing prices have been going up. There is no doubt about that. Part of it is the fact that, the people have been saving an awful lot of money during the pandemic. And as a matter of fact, there are more new people coming into the housing.
But the housing prices are going up so much that people can't afford, like young people cannot afford a house anymore. A lot of young people actually are affording houses because they've been able to save during the pandemic. So I don't think that they can save that much money during the pandemic.
Okay, we have a few more seconds. Yes, keep going.
There's many people that I've spoken to who are around my age and younger who are trying to buy a house and they can simply not afford it.
Well, this will be relieved with more housing, and especially with the kind of measures that we're going to bring in or proposing to bring in that'll actually stop the essential things that are driving up the prices of housing.
Is this actually going to take place though, or are we just talking again?
There's the buzzer. I'm sorry. Any talk about housing and the market and pricing gets me excited. So that's the buzzer there on that. That ends our Crossfire section of the evening. Mr. Hardy and Ms. Tour, you will now get 1 minute each for your final and closing remarks for the evening. Mr. Hardy, we'll begin with you.
Liberals used to have a saying that we're free enterprise with a social conscience. But what that really means these days is that we believe in the free market. We believe that people who work hard, invest their time, their money, their talent, deserve a reward. But we also know that the free market, the free enterprise system, is blind to human suffering. The free market will not lift a young person out of poverty like the Canada Child Benefit did. The free market will not deal with climate change, which I'm sorry we didn't get into in our portion of the debate, because it just doesn't do that sort of thing. So what you need is a government that is prepared to step in where the free market can't perform. That's the government that we've been since 2015. And tomorrow, when the platform comes out, you'll see that that's the government we intend to be going forward.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Hardy. Ms. Tour, you'll now get 1 minute for your final remarks.
I'd like to close with saying that we need a government that is working for you. The NDP and Jagmeet Singh will be working for you. We need to have a difference in Fleetwood Pork Hells. We need to elect someone who is not afraid to do the work and who has actually been involved with this type of work before. So voters, please go out there, look at all of the candidates and make your decision wisely.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Tour. I want to thank both the Liberal and NDP parties for participating in tonight's debate. I want to thank Mr. Ken Hardy and Ms. Raji Tour for taking up the time and being here with us tonight. This does conclude tonight's federal debate. You know, there was a lot of buzz. Will there be election? Will there not be election? Will there be an election? But here it is. Your opportunity as Canadian citizens to elect the 44th Canadian Parliament. Our vote is our voice, and we must exercise our voice. But in order to exercise our voice, we must get informed. So ask those questions. Make sure that our concerns are addressed. And we thank the parties, the NDP and the Liberal Party, that did come out tonight, the candidates that did heed the call, as our call was sent out to all ridings, to all candidates, and to all parties. Our vote is our fundamental democratic right. We encourage all of you to go out, all Canadian citizens, to go out and vote on September 20th, 2021. From all of us here at Channel Punjabi, before we conclude tonight, I definitely not just want to thank the candidates, but also our esteemed panelists. We had Mr. Gurpreet Singh Sahota, we also had Mr. Jaskaran Sahota, and Mr. Baldeep Singh, who's an esteemed journalist, join us tonight. I want to thank you, the viewers, for tuning in, and let's go to the polls. Let's have our voices heard. Thank you so much.